Hey guys, tonight we slip into the velvet shadows of forgotten palaces, where the air is cool and the marble floors echo under your careful footsteps. You're about to step into the hidden lives of Chinese queens, the women whose whispers could bend the course of dynasties, even though their names rarely made it into the grand official histories. Imagine yourself drifting down a long, painted corridor, walls glowing faintly with candlelight, the scent of sandalwood incense rising lazily toward the rafters. And here's the first reality check: you probably wouldn't last a single morning under their strict ritual schedule, where even sneezing in the wrong direction could count as bad luck for the empire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love for you to post your location and local time in the comments, so I know when and where in the world you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace begins to stir long before sunrise. You're there, padding through echoing courtyards as the first bells of the watchtower announce that the emperor's household must awaken. You find yourself at the threshold of the queen's quarters, officially called the inner palace, where only a chosen few are ever allowed. She is already awake, sitting upright on a lacquered bed, her hair flowing loose down her back. The air is cool, but the steady glow of an oil lamp paints warm ripples over the gilded beams. Attendants kneel silently, holding trays of combs carved from tortoiseshell and bowls of steaming water infused with chrysanthemum petals. This ritual is less about vanity and more about order. A queen's hair had to be washed, oiled, and pinned in strict styles, each one declaring her rank. Historians still argue whether some of these elaborate hair arrangements were comfortable, or whether they were ingenious forms of quiet torture that left queens nursing headaches all day. You picture yourself enduring the pins, the weight of jade hair ornaments pressing on your scalp, and wonder if a messy ponytail might have sparked a rebellion. After her hair, the queen is dressed in layers of silk, each one symbolic. A yellow lining might mean she is closest to the emperor's favor, while a dark green trim signals fertility. Here's the mainstream fact. The Tang Dynasty queens were famous for their vibrant, voluminous robes, while Ming queens were bound by rules so strict that every stitch had to follow an imperial code. But here's the quirky tidbit archaeologists have found hidden stitching in the underlayers. Little personal flourishes, like stitched-in good luck charms, or even tiny embroidered ducks, unseen by anyone else. You imagine her laughing softly, knowing only she and her maid share the secret beneath her rigid uniform. The next step of the dawn ritual is purification. The queen rinses her hands in water, scented with herbs, sometimes mint, sometimes mugwort, and offers a silent prayer to ancestors. You're invited to kneel beside her, your knees pressing into a woven mat that smells faintly of bamboo. Outside, the palace is still quiet, broken only by the caw of distant crows. This moment of stillness, of a queen connecting to the unseen world, feels more intimate than any throne room ceremony. Now, breakfast arrives on a tray. A bowl of thin millet porridge, a few pickled plums, and a slice of steamed bun. You probably expected something grand, but imperial queens rarely indulged in heavy meals at dawn. Some records even claim that Cixi, the formidable Empress Dowager of the Qing dynasty, insisted on sipping tea before anything else. Ironically, her morning cup sometimes took longer to prepare than an entire soldier's rations. You take a sip of the fragrant brew and notice the bitterness lingering on your tongue, balanced by a sweet aftertaste. The ritual continues with a check-in. Attendants recite lists of scheduled audiences, family duties, and ceremonial appearances. Here, you see the quiet power of queens. By choosing to linger at a shrine or adjust the order of greetings, they could shift palace politics ever so slightly, the way a fingertip nudges a spinning coin. You might think this is boring bureaucracy, but in the world of the Forbidden City, even boring could be life or death. As the morning deepens, she pauses to look out the lattice window. The sun is rising over tiled rooftops, casting long amber rays across the courtyard. For a fleeting second, you can imagine her feeling something universal, the comfort of routine, the burden of expectation, the ache of wanting just a little more freedom. Historians still argue whether these queens felt trapped by ritual or empowered by mastering it. Perhaps, like you, she simply adjusted, finding small joys in a flowered comb or the crisp taste of chrysanthemum water. And so, as the dawn rituals come to a close, you are left with a sense of paradox. Every tiny act, from sipping tea to choosing a robe, was loaded with meaning. Yet, in the quiet rhythm of it all, there was also a strange calm. The palace might have demanded perfection, but for a few minutes in the soft morning glow, the queen simply existed, still, serene, and perhaps a little amused at the fuss swirling around her. You move from the echoing courtyards into a chamber dimly lit by the soft gleam of polished bronze mirrors. Here, you trail behind attendants carrying carved wooden boxes, each one stacked with layers of folded silk, shimmering like water when the lids are lifted. The queen's wardrobe is less a collection of clothes and more a living document. Every sleeve, collar, and ribbon tells the story of her station, her mood, and sometimes her quiet rebellion. You lean closer as attendants lay out the mourning robes. Silk rustles like whispers, dyed in deep hues of cinnabar, jade, and indigo. In the Tang dynasty, these bright colors were statements of confidence, a dynasty in love with excess. In contrast, Ming queens were locked into more muted palettes, every choice dictated by the Ming Palace Code. Historians still argue whether this was meant to reinforce discipline or simply keep queens from upstaging the emperor. You imagine the frustration like being told you can only wear beige sweaters forever, while your neighbor struts around in neon green. Yet, beneath all that rigidity, secrets were stitched in. Some robes carried talismanic symbols hidden in linings, dragons for strength, lotus blossoms for purity, even tiny bats symbols of luck tucked into unseen hems. You picture a queen sitting stiffly at a ceremony while privately smiling, knowing she's literally wrapped in secret blessings. One fringe detail preserved in folklore claims that some queens ordered hidden pockets inside their gowns for love notes or charms, though whether these were practical or just romantic legend is still up for debate. Now you step closer to the mirror, catching your reflection beside hers. Queens did not dress themselves. Dozens of hands adjusted layers, tied sashes, and set embroidered belts. A single mistake, a sash tied backward, or a color slightly off, could spark gossip. The wardrobe was a battlefield fought in silks and stitches, where even the choice of a cloud pattern versus a phoenix motif could hint at subtle alliances. The mainstream fact here is the phoenix itself, the supreme emblem of queenship. Embroidered on skirts, carved into jewelry, it declared her status as the yin counterpart to the emperor's dragon. But here's the quirky tidbit. Phoenixes weren't always dainty birds of flame. In early Chinese art, they looked more like clumsy hybrid chickens, with tails dragging behind them. You imagine a queen rolling her eyes, draped in embroidered poultry, hoping future artists would do her spirit animal more justice. Once dressed, attention turned to accessories. Jade bracelets slid over wrists, not just decoration, but believed to ward off illness. A hairpin of gold and kingfisher feathers gleamed in the lamplight, the blue so intense it almost seemed unreal. You catch yourself staring at the shimmer, then remember these feathers were painstakingly plucked and glued, an entire bird sacrificed for a single accessory. It's the kind of detail that makes you sigh, half admiring, half uneasy. Historians still argue whether queens found joy in these adornments, or whether they felt like mannequins, dressed and displayed for politics rather than themselves. Some suggest that queens cleverly used fashion as coded language, selecting a robe's shade or a subtle motif to communicate messages without uttering a word. Imagine slipping on a belt embroidered with cranes, and knowing your rival across the hall will see it and think, "She's reminding us of her father's military victories." It's fashion diplomacy runway meets spy novel. And then, the perfumes. The wardrobe chamber is never quiet. It's filled with the faint smoke of incense. The queen chooses her scent, like an invisible robe. Sandalwood for calm, musk for authority, jasmine for softness. There's a record of Empress Xu of the Ming Dynasty being so fond of orchid perfume that her rooms were said to smell of it even after she left. You breathe in the air and find it both soothing and dizzying, a reminder that even scents could shape the image of power. As the final silk ties are secured, the queen rises, a human mosaic of fabric and symbolism. You walk beside her and feel the weight not just of the clothes, but of the centuries of ritual stitched into them. You think of your own closet back home, maybe filled with jeans and hoodies, and wonder if future historians will argue about the secret meaning of your favorite sweatshirt. The moment lingers. She turns, the silks shifting like ripples on a pond, her reflection splitting into many in the polished bronze mirror. For a queen, the wardrobe was never just about beauty. It was armor, language, identity, and sometimes a private joke stitched into the lining. The fragrance of orchid and sandalwood still trails after her as you wander into the quieter wing where the morning trays have been prepared. Today you're allowed to peek, though not taste too boldly, at the secret meals that queens consumed, meals that were as ceremonial as they were peculiar. The first thing you notice is that breakfast and lunch here never look like the banquet scenes you've seen in costume dramas. No mountains of roast ducks or endless wine goblets. Instead, delicate porcelain bowls hold carefully chosen portions, as if the palace chefs cooked with tweezers. A plain millet porridge, a few slices of preserved plum, steamed greens sprinkled with sesame, and if fortune smiled that day, a sliver of freshwater fish. The mainstream fact is this: the imperial household operated under strict dietary laws. Each dynasty had its food code, prescribing which grains, vegetables, and meats the emperor and his queen could eat. Pork might appear in one reign, forbidden in another. Certain fruits were seasonal, but rules decided whether they could be consumed even when ripe. It was less about flavor and more about symbolism. Pearls of rice signified purity, lotus roots symbolized continuity. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens were rumored to slip in forbidden snacks. A Ming record whispers about palace women secretly passing candied melon slices, hidden in sleeves. Imagine leaning back against a silk pillow, pretending to sip tea while sneaking what was essentially the 15th century version of gummy bears. Attendants risked punishment for these indulgences, but human cravings often outweigh palace rules. Food was medicine as much as sustenance. A tiny dish of ginseng soup might appear, believed to restore vitality. A cup of deer antler broth might follow, thick and slightly unsettling. You wince, but remember, this wasn't a culture of snacks and soda. Every bite was tied to longevity and balance of QI. Historians still argue whether these remedies had measurable effects, or if they served more as psychological armor against the stresses of court life. Either way, you find yourself wondering if your own pantry of potato chips could ever pass as a ritual of wellness. Some dishes were avoided entirely. Garlic, for example, was sometimes banned from queens' diets because its strong smell was thought unfit for the refined inner palace. Imagine never knowing the joy of garlic bread. You'd cry softly into your rice bowl, but the queen would simply smile and adapt, as queens always did. Another taboo? Certain meats during sacred ceremonies. A queen couldn't risk offending cosmic balance with the wrong stew. Yet not all meals were austere. Special occasions brought extravagance. You're invited to recline at a low lacquered table, where attendants placed jade-colored plates filled with bird's nest soup, shark fin, or rare fruits carried from distant provinces. Here, luxury was a performance. The queen herself might only sip at a dish, but the message was clear. If she could command dragon fruit in midwinter, she could command loyalty. And then there was tea. Always tea. Poured in cups so thin they rang like bells when tapped, steeped with leaves curled tighter than a cat in the sundae. The Empress Dowager Cixi was said to keep dozens of varieties at hand, her favorites infused with chrysanthemum petals. You sip, inhaling steam, and feel the caffeine slide gently into your bloodstream. Imagine palace life without coffee tragic. Really. But tea filled the gap, subtle and sustaining. Occasionally, superstition crept in. Certain foods were avoided on unlucky days. A dish with too many bones, might be skipped because bones symbolize fracture. Fish served whole was auspicious, but fish served broken could hint at division. You start to realize that eating here was like navigating a minefield disguised as a buffet. Every bite could carry an omen. Yet, for all the rules, the private act of eating remained one of the queen's rare freedoms. Behind screens, away from the emperor and courtiers, she could savor a favorite fruit or toy with chopsticks like anyone else. Picture her laughing quietly at a plum pit, rolling it between her fingers, savoring its tart aftertaste. Historians still argue whether queens actually enjoyed these meals or whether eating was just another ritual in their long, exhausting day. But as you rise from the lacquered table, you sense something familiar. The comfort of food, the way a warm bowl of rice soothes even the most pressured soul. Behind the silks and ceremonies, the queen was simply human, savoring flavors that reminded her she was alive. The trays are cleared away, the last curl of steam rising from an untouched teacup, and you drift with her into a quieter chamber, lined not with silk, but with scrolls. The wardrobe and meals may have been carefully choreographed, but here in the study chambers, the queen could breathe a little more freely, though only just. This was the heart of her intellectual world, a place where knowledge doubled as both pastime and political tool. You tread across woven mats that hush your footsteps, the smell of aged paper mingling with faint incense, stacks of bamboo slips, silk manuscripts, and later, bound books line carved shelves. It's less the roaring library of scholars and more an intimate retreat, filled with the hush of brush on parchment. You catch her seated at a low desk, sleeves draped gracefully, holding a slender brush dipped in ink. Mainstream fact, queens of China, especially in the Han and Tang dynasties, were expected to be cultured. They weren't just decorative figures, they were patrons of calligraphy, poetry, and the Confucian classics. An educated queen could subtly influence the emperor, correct rituals, or model refinement for the court. Historians note that Empress Xu of the Ming dynasty was celebrated for her poetry, though sadly, much of her work is lost. Now, here's the quirky tidbit. Some records mention queens hiding playful doodles among serious writings, small sketches of flowers, cats, or even self-portraits. Imagine leafing through centuries of solemn philosophy only to find a cheeky doodle of a phoenix sporting oversized feathers. It's the ancient equivalent of a queen slipping a smiley face into her homework. The room isn't just for writing. Tutors sometimes visited, murmuring lessons in astronomy, music, or the intricate etiquette of palace ceremonies. You crouch in the corner, listening as a gray-bearded scholar explains star charts, pointing at constellations painted on a silk map. You realize that even queens, wrapped in power and privilege, still endured the eternal plight of students everywhere: long lessons, dry voices, and the occasional daydream about snacks. Historians still argue whether queens used their learning primarily for personal growth or political maneuvering. Some suggest study was a survival strategy. The more cultivated a queen appeared, the harder it was for rivals to dismiss her. Others see it as genuine passion. Many of these women adored the beauty of language, the rhythm of poetry, the serenity of ink on silk. Attendants move quietly around the study, refreshing inkstones, laying out brushes. You try one yourself, dragging the brush across the paper. The ink blooms unevenly, your characters wobbling embarrassingly. The queen hides a smile, though etiquette prevents her from laughing outright. The air is soft with patience. This is not a race, but a meditation. Brushwork wasn't just about words. It was about balance, breathing, and focus. Then there are the lacquered boxes, each containing letters received from family, sometimes from distant provinces. Though censored, these words brought warmth to an otherwise chilly palace. One queen of the Song dynasty supposedly wept over a letter describing village life, missing the sound of chickens at dawn more than any luxury. You can almost hear her sigh as she folds the parchment carefully, tucking away both comfort and longing. At times, the chamber doubled as a stage for private performances. You settle cross-legged as musicians arrive with guqing and pipa, their strings plucked in soft melodies. The queen listens, head tilted, perhaps tapping one jade ring gently against the desk in rhythm. Music was more than entertainment. It was believed to harmonize the soul, balancing the chaos of court. You find yourself swaying, lulled, as if the notes themselves are an invisible fan cooling the heavy summer air. And then there are the secret books. Some historians whisper about hidden texts on Taoist alchemy or manuals of strategy passed discreetly among consorts. Did queens actually dabble in such things? Or were these rumors exaggerated? Scholars still debate, but the idea is tantalizing. A queen reading about immortality potions while sipping chrysanthemum tea, her face unreadable in the lamplight. As the morning stretches into afternoon, the chamber fills with the gentle rhythm of study ink grinding, brushes swishing, pages turning. You realize this isn't just another ritual. It's her escape, her way of carving out identity in a world where so much was scripted. Here, she could choose which poem to copy, which song to hum, which doodle to hide between the lines. You glance around one last time before leaving. The shelves seem to lean closer, scrolls whispering their secrets. The queen bends over her desk, lost in ink and thought, and you slip away, carrying with you the reminder that knowledge, however fragile, was one of her quietest, most enduring powers. The study chamber fades behind you, but the quiet hum of voices does not. You drift into the long, tiled corridors where echoes carry like gossip, bouncing from painted beams to carved screens. Here in the labyrinth of the inner palace, whispers are as sharp as knives. You soon realize that for a queen, words are as dangerous as swords, and sometimes more effective. You walk beside her, and attendants trail just behind, their eyes lowered, their ears always open. Every bow, every murmur, carries layers of meaning. A passing concubine offers a compliment about her robe. Such elegant stitching, Your Majesty, but the tone suggests a barb. Perhaps too much effort for a woman past her prime. You feel the sting in the air, even as the queen smiles serenely, acknowledging the remark with nothing more than a graceful nod. Mainstream fact: gossip wasn't idle chatter in the Chinese court. It was currency, traded, and hoarded. In dynasties from Han to Qing, eunuchs, ladies-in-waiting, and even cooks became part of an invisible network, relaying tidbits up and down the palace hierarchy. Information could elevate a woman into favor or topple her into disgrace. Whole careers rose and fell on whispers overheard near garden gates. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some records, gossip spread through coded gifts. A fruit basket left outside one chamber might hint at favor. A vase of wilted flowers, at disapproval. Imagine Instagram likes, but in fruit form, and much more terrifying. Historians still argue whether these gestures were genuinely understood as codes or whether later chroniclers exaggerated their meaning. Still, you imagine queens glancing warily at every melon delivery, wondering what subtle message might be hidden inside. The queen leads you into a side hall, its walls painted with cranes and clouds. There, she pauses, half hidden by a screen, as two attendants quietly exchange news. Which consort had quarreled with which minister's daughter, who had sent unusual offerings to the emperor's study? You hear the tension in their lowered voices, a mixture of caution and thrill. They risk punishment for speaking too freely, yet the temptation to share is irresistible. The air feels thicker here, heavy with unspoken rivalries. You realize that a queen couldn't simply dismiss gossip, she had to navigate it, steer it, sometimes even plant it. Rumors about her health could encourage rivals. Whispers of her generosity could reinforce her position. One empress of the Han dynasty was said to spread small rumors about herself, such as favoring simple meals so that ministers would praise her frugality to the emperor. Imagine turning palace tabloids into your personal PR campaign. But gossip cut both ways. Queens also became victims of slander. A rival could whisper that she favored certain eunuchs too much, or that her family sought more influence, and suddenly, an innocent gesture became a scandal. Historians still argue whether some dramatic downfalls, like the infamous case of consort Zhao Feiyan, were caused by actual misdeeds or malicious gossip snowballing into accusations. It's a reminder that words, once released, had a momentum all their own. You lean in closer, trying not to breathe too loudly, as a maid describes an unusual offering sent to the queen's rivals, a set of jade bracelets, one of which cracked during polishing. Harmless? Perhaps. But in palace logic, a crack in jade was a bad omen, a whisper of weakness. The rival would have to smile while accepting it, knowing the entire court might interpret the fracture as fate itself. The queen herself rarely responds directly. Instead, she lets her gestures speak. A pause before answering, a slight tilt of the head, a smile held one heartbeat too long. These subtle acts ripple through the gossip chain, interpreted and reinterpreted until they take on lives of their own. You wonder if anyone ever truly knew her intentions, or if she was playing a deeper game of shadows. You follow her down the corridor, the whispers fading behind you, but they cling to your ears like threads of silk. They remind you of the way rumors travel in your own world through office kitchens, group chats, or that one friend who just heard this, don't tell anyone. And just like now, in those moments, silence can be as powerful as speech. For queens, whispers weren't just background noise. They were survival, tools of influence, weapons of defense. Walking beside her, you sense her composure as both shield and signal, her serenity carefully maintained. Behind it all, you suspect, is exhaustion, the endless effort of appearing untouched by the gossip that constantly swirled around her. The corridor narrows, the last whispers dissolving into birdsong, and you find yourself stepping through a painted archway into a garden that feels hidden from the world. Here, the queen can finally exhale. No courtiers, no rivals, just winding paths of pebbles, pavilions shaded with tiled roofs, and ponds where koi drift lazily beneath lotus leaves. The air smells green bamboo, pine, damp earth after a night rain, and you almost forget this oasis lies within stone palace walls. Queens across dynasties cultivated private gardens, and each space told its own quiet story. Mainstream fact: the Tang dynasty favored sprawling, ornate gardens with artificial hills and imported peonies, while Ming and Qing palaces emphasized symmetry, balance, and miniature landscapes. Every rock placement symbolized mountains, every water feature symbolized rivers. These weren't just pretty corners, they were miniature versions of the empire, where the queen could symbolically preside as caretaker. But here's the quirky tidbit. In some gardens, koi ponds doubled as message boards. Tiny slips of silk, waterproofed with wax, were tucked into floating lotus petals or tied with thread to a fish's tail. Attendants claimed not to notice, though of course they did. Imagine palace secrets drifting across a pond, disguised as tranquil scenery. Historians still argue whether these tales are fact or embroidered folklore. But you lean over the water anyway, half expecting to glimpse a fish trailing a note like a very confused courier pigeon. The queen strolls beside you, her embroidered shoes crunching softly over pebbles. She pauses to admire a peony in bloom, her hand hovering just above the petals without touching. In the palace, nothing is random, even the flowers are coded. The peony, symbol of wealth; the lotus, purity; the plum blossom, resilience in hardship. A bouquet wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration. You start to think the palace was basically one long emoji conversation, only in floral form. The pavilions are built for lingering. You sit on a wooden bench carved with clouds, looking out across the pond. The queen closes her eyes as a breeze lifts the silk ribbons of her sleeves. For a moment, you sense her enjoying something close to freedom. And yet, even here, politics lurks. The design of her garden is often compared with others whose peonies bloomed first, whose pavilions had the finer jade railings. Historians still argue whether these comparisons were friendly rivalry or veiled political statements. She gestures toward a rock formation, tall and jagged, resembling a mountain peak. These scholar rocks were prized for their strangeness, twisted holes, impossible shapes, a reminder of nature's unpredictability. Some emperors obsessed over them, but queens too collected the most unusual stones. One empress was said to favor a rock that looked like a sleeping lion, Another preferred one shaped like a hollow cave, perfect for echoing whispers. You crouch near one, calling softly, amused as your voice bounces back. Even the rocks here are eavesdropping. As you wander further, you find a small tea house tucked among bamboo groves. The queen steps inside, and attendants serve delicate cups of green tea with floating chrysanthemum petals. You sip, and the tea is faintly sweet, carrying the freshness of the garden itself. Conversations here are softer, safer. A trusted maid leans in, murmuring about the queen's hometown, her childhood memories of chasing fireflies. You realize gardens weren't just refuges. They were spaces where queens could reconnect with fragments of their own pasts. And sometimes, the garden became a stage for subtle rituals. A bowl of water placed under moonlight to reflect the sky. A folded prayer tied to a plum branch. Queens might sit in meditation, seeking balance in the swirl of palace life. Some texts suggest they whispered their private fears to the koi, believing the fish carried secrets away, never to return them. You smile at the thought of koi doubling as tiny therapists, patiently listening to royal woes. Historians still argue whether queens designed these gardens themselves or whether they were simply assigned another set of curated spaces handed down by architects. Yet as you walk beneath wisteria vines heavy with blossoms, you feel the personality in the place. Her choices, her preferences, her hidden fingerprints in stone and petal. This is no generic garden. It is hers. The queen stops before a moon gate, a circular opening framing the courtyard beyond. The sun has shifted, spilling golden light through the round arch, turning the pond into molten bronze. She lingers, serene, as if she knows this fleeting beauty belongs to her alone. And you, standing beside her, sense the bittersweet truth. A garden may offer freedom, but the palace walls always loom beyond its edges. You follow her from the tranquil garden into a chamber redolent with strange, pungent scents. Jars of powders, dried roots, and tiny boxes of pearls line lacquered shelves. This is where the queen explored the mysterious world of remedies, potions, elixirs, and the occasional experiment in palace medicine. You wrinkle your nose at the odd aromas, but there's also an intoxicating sweetness, like a perfume woven from secret ingredients. Mainstream fact: Chinese imperial courts were known for their interest in health and longevity. Queens often had personal physicians and access to exotic ingredients, ginseng from the mountains, deer antlers, pearls crushed into powders, and herbs imported from distant regions. These substances were believed to maintain beauty, vitality, and even influence fertility. Some remedies were surprisingly effective, others less so. Historians still argue whether these medicinal practices had measurable results, or whether their primary purpose was ritualistic. The quirky tidbit: a few queens experimented with rather odd concoctions. One empress reportedly soaked jade slices in wine and applied the solution to her skin, convinced it preserved youth. Another reportedly believed that crocodile dung mixed with certain herbs could act as sunscreen. You shudder at the thought, but also picture her standing proudly before a mirror, utterly convinced, while attendants hide mild panic behind their fans. The queen moves between shelves, lifting jars with a delicate hand. She checks powders, turns vials, and sniffs teas steeping in tiny porcelain cups. Some remedies were taken internally, others applied to the skin. Pills and potions were meticulously labeled, each for specific ailments or ceremonial purposes. A sip of chrysanthemum tea might calm the mind. A paste of powdered pearls might smooth the skin. You wonder if these rituals were more about psychology than physiology, a confidence booster disguised as medicine. Her attendants assist quietly, crushing herbs with marble mortars, grinding them into powders. The rhythmic motion creates a gentle clatter that mixes with the soft tick of a nearby clock. You notice tiny slips of silk tucked into some jars, possibly reminders of secret formulas or notes on efficacy. In the palace, knowledge was power, and keeping remedies discreet could prevent envy or sabotage. Some remedies were socially strategic. Certain elixirs were served to the emperor or high-ranking officials, subtly influencing their moods or reinforcing her status. One popular potion promised clarity of mind, and you can imagine officials sipping daintily, unaware that they were quietly participating in her subtle influence over palace politics. It's the perfect blend of health, ritual, and soft diplomacy. She pauses before a small cabinet containing exotic ingredients: powdered pearls, ginseng roots shaped like tiny humans, rare mushrooms, and dried seahorses. These substances could cost a fortune, often sourced from faraway mountains or coasts. You stare at the tiny boxes and imagine couriers traversing treacherous terrain to deliver them. The dedication borders on obsession, but obsession here was expected, almost admired. Historians still argue whether these elixirs were primarily intended for health, beauty, or mystical purposes. Some suggest they were about maintaining appearances. Others say they reflected a genuine fascination with longevity and alchemy. You sense a combination practicality wrapped in mysticism, ritual woven with curiosity. As she prepares a small mixture, gently stirring a pale powder into water, you feel the intimacy of this hidden routine. Outside, palace life continues, full of rigid ceremony and expectation. Here, she experiments quietly, a scientist, a poet, and a dreamer all at once. You lean closer, inhaling the faint aroma, realizing that even amid silk, gossip, and grandeur, the queen claimed small moments of autonomy, moments measured in pinches of powdered pearl and sips of strange teas. And as she lifts the cup to her lips, the morning sunlight spilling through lattice windows, you understand. Behind every whisper of fragrance and every secret potion is a queen fully engaged in her private world. A world where science, superstition, and serenity intersect. You sip your imaginary cup alongside her, smiling at the strange and marvelous ingenuity of human curiosity. The sun has begun to sink lower, stretching shadows across marble corridors, and you follow her back into the inner palace, where candlelight flickers like soft stars. Midnight is approaching, though in the inner chambers, midnight is more a guideline than a strict hour. Here, rituals shift from structured routines to a quieter, almost mystical tempo. You walk beside the queen as she prepares for these nocturnal practices, sensing the hush of anticipation, as if the palace itself is holding its breath. One ritual involves reading omens in the quietest moments of night. Mainstream fact: Chinese queens often consulted astrology and divination, interpreting celestial patterns to guide personal and political decisions. Scrolls detailing lunar phases, star charts, and eclipses were kept at hand, and specialists sometimes whispered interpretations in low voices. Historians still argue whether these practices were genuinely predictive or simply a framework for meditation and planning. You lean over a polished table, peering at a diagram of the stars and tracing the path of Venus as it arcs across silk charts. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens reportedly interpreted dreams literally, keeping dream journals by candlelight. One empress claimed she could predict courtly rivalries from the way a cat moved in her dreams. Another believed that certain types of shadows on palace walls foretold minor disputes between officials. You picture her jotting down, "Cat jumped on table. Official X will argue with Y tomorrow," and chuckle softly. It's like medieval Twitter, only inked in secrecy. You notice that attendants move with ghostly precision. No one speaks above a whisper, and the air smells faintly of sandalwood and beeswax. This nocturnal atmosphere makes every action feel amplified: the soft scraping of brush on paper, the gentle pouring of water into a teacup. You start to feel the sleepy ASMR rhythm of it all. The palace itself, a lullaby built of ritual and scent. Candles are placed in ritual alignment, their flames mirrored in tiny jade bowls of water. The queen moves slowly, touching each flame with care, her motions deliberate yet fluid. Each gesture is symbolic, inviting protection, warding off unseen misfortune, or simply centering her mind. Historians still argue whether queens adhered strictly to these rituals or adapted them creatively for personal meaning. You can imagine her humming softly, an almost imperceptible tune that calms both her attendants and herself. At times, the queen seeks guidance in nature, even indoors. A single orchid in a porcelain vase might be observed under moonlight, petals counted, and shadows interpreted. You watch her lean close, noting the way the flower's edges catch candlelight. It's both meditation and divination, blending the practical and the mystical. And sometimes, midnight rituals involve complete silence. The queen sits cross-legged on a woven mat, hands resting lightly on her knees, eyes closed, listening to the palace's subtle night sounds. The creak of wood, the distant drip of water, the occasional flutter of a bird outside lattice windows. You find yourself settling beside her, noting the tiny details, the hush of silk brushing against floors, the rhythmic breathing of an attendant seated nearby. You realize these rituals serve dual purposes. They are both spiritual and psychological. In a palace where control is constant, moments of stillness are a queen's private rebellion against the chaos of court life. You picture her exhaling, letting go of the day's endless choreography, the gossip, the layered meanings behind every smile and bow. Historians still argue whether these practices had religious significance or were primarily tools for stress relief and focus. Either way, you feel the quiet power of repetition, of meditation, of observing the world in shadows. You imagine slipping under the same soft candlelight, your own mind slowing to match hers, and for a few timeless moments, you inhabit her calm. By the end of the ritual, the palace is nearly silent. The queen extinguishes candles one by one, each puff of smoke curling upward like a secret whispered to the night. And as you follow her back to the silk-draped chambers, the hushed magic of midnight clings to your senses, a soft reminder that even in immense power, serenity is fiercely cherished. The lanterns are dimmed further now, their amber glow barely illuminating the hallway as you trail after her. You sense a shift in the air. The court is asleep, the servants' footsteps have grown infrequent, and the palace itself seems to exhale. This is when the most subtle power plays occur, the maneuvers so quiet you'd miss them if you blinked. You follow closely, careful to note gestures, pauses, and unspoken signals, because in this world, a slight nod or the flick of a sleeve can alter the trajectory of an entire dynasty. Mainstream fact: queens wielded influence not through brute force but through social mastery. Hand gestures, seating positions at banquets, and even the order of greeting ministers all sent messages to those in the know. A queen's quiet touch could reward loyalty. A withheld smile could punish. Historians still argue whether these subtle acts were universally recognized or if interpretations varied wildly depending on the observer's perspective. You notice her hand as it hovers, almost imperceptibly, over a folded fan. A slight tilt conveys a message. Favor for one attendant, mild disapproval for another. You realize that every motion, every glance, is a coded language she speaks fluently. A dialect of power that requires years of immersion to understand. Her influence is invisible, yet pervasive, like the way gravity bends the path of water unseen but unavoidably. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens reportedly trained to recognize the weight and sound of particular steps on palace floors. The tap of a sandal could indicate whether an attendant was anxious, a spy, or simply late. You imagine her leaning discreetly against a carved pillar, listening intently to the soft rhythm of feet, mentally categorizing them, a human metronome of palace intrigue. You follow her through a quiet antechamber, where she pauses briefly to adjust a painting. It's a subtle display. By shifting a brushstroke or slightly tilting a scroll, she signals her aesthetic influence and, indirectly, her dominance over taste, culture, and attention within the court. The act is almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but to those who watch carefully, it speaks volumes. The queen sits briefly, motionless, folding her hands in her lap. You note how courtiers often misread her stillness for disinterest, when in fact it's a deliberate pause, a method to observe and analyze. Silent power plays require patience, subtlety, and impeccable timing. A queen could spend hours waiting for the perfect moment to speak or gesture, and those few seconds would carry more weight than an entire public decree. Historians still argue whether these micro-strategies were conscious political maneuvering or simply habit born of centuries of courtly etiquette. Either way, you feel the elegance of restraint as you walk beside her, marveling at the layers of influence encoded in mere presence and posture. She rises and moves toward the chamber's lattice window, looking out over the moonlit palace grounds. You notice the way the shadows fall across her robes, emphasizing the curves and edges that are part costume, part armor. A single gesture of her hand commands attention, yet no sound escapes her lips. You understand that the palace has many theaters of drama, some loud, some silent. This, you realize, is the most dangerous stage of all, the one where silence speaks louder than words. As you leave the hall behind, you carry with you the sense of a chessboard played with flesh, fabric, and shadow. Here, influence isn't declared, it's suggested. It isn't demanded, it's implied. And you, wandering beside her in the quiet, are both witness and participant, absorbing the soft lessons of patience, subtlety, and power. The following morning, or what counts as morning when your life is measured by candlelight and whispered routines, you find yourself reclining at a low lacquered table alongside the queen. The room smells faintly of steamed rice, incense, and varnished wood, and the quiet is punctuated only by the gentle clatter of porcelain and the muted scrape of a brush. Today is a banquet, but not the kind that dazzles with excess. This is a ritual banquet, where every bite, sip, and gesture carries meaning. Mainstream fact: ritual banquets were central to palace life. Dishes were arranged to reflect hierarchy, season, and cosmic harmony. Emperors and queens participated not just for sustenance but to honor ancestors, celebrate auspicious dates, or reinforce alliances. The order of service, the placement of cups, even the way food was cut, communicated status and intent. Historians still argue whether these meals were primarily ceremonial or whether they also functioned as strategic displays of power. You notice small, intricate plates arranged in a precise pattern. Lotus roots, bird's nest soup, tiny dumplings, and jade-colored fruits glimmer under lantern light. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some ingredients were intentionally symbolic, like sweet osmanthus to represent eternal youth or melon seeds as tiny promises of fertility. One empress was rumored to occasionally swap items on the tray as a playful signal to a favored attendant, much like leaving a wink in a note. You imagine the chaos if a minister misread a melon seed as an imperial decree. It would be the ancient equivalent of sending a misfired text. Tea flows continuously in delicate cups, thin enough to see your fingertips through the porcelain. The queen lifts hers with precise elegance, swirling it in a way that signals approval or mild disapproval without a word spoken. Observing the ceremony, you realize the banquet is both a stage and a classroom, teaching manners, etiquette, and the subtle art of influence. Even a laugh, carefully timed, could send ripples across the court. Attendants move with quiet choreography, passing dishes, refilling cups, and noting responses. You can almost imagine a secret scorecard of reactions. Who smiled? Who hesitated? Who lingered over a bite? These observations are noted, discussed, and sometimes leveraged later. Historians still argue whether this level of scrutiny was pervasive in all dynasties or exaggerated in retrospective accounts. Either way, the precision is fascinating, almost hypnotic. Some banquets included performances, guqing melodies, shadow puppetry, or poetic recitals. The queen listens attentively, nodding occasionally, the movement of her fingers like punctuation in a conversation no one else can hear. Music and art are tools of subtle diplomacy. They display refinement, command attention, and occasionally serve as quiet critiques of rivals' taste or etiquette. You imagine her internal monologue, judging each note and gesture with the eye of a strategist. Here's a detail you can't miss: a folded napkin at the edge of her plate. It is not decorative, it's a message. Perhaps a warning, a signal of favor, or a reminder of protocol. Observers might not notice, but you do. You realize that even during leisure, the queen is always performing, always guiding perception, always exercising influence in the most discreet ways possible. The food itself is savored slowly, intentionally, each bite an act of presence. You take a mental note. This is less about hunger and more about embodiment. A queen's meal is a meditation, a strategy, and a declaration wrapped in porcelain and silk. Even in small acts, she controls rhythm, focus, and mood. As the banquet winds down, you feel the ebb of energy in the room. Plates are cleared, teacups refilled one last time, and the soft scrape of lacquered trays signals closure. Yet, the effects linger. Alliances are hinted at, rivalries noted, messages sent and received without a single word. You leave the chamber aware that this ritual banquet, delicate and measured, is both nourishment and theater, a blend of sustenance and power that leaves an impression far longer than any simple meal could. Later, you find yourself gliding along the palace corridors toward the gates that open onto the wider world. Today, the queen travels beyond her familiar walls, but not in the ostentatious way you might expect. Disguised as a common lady, in waiting or veiled under embroidered silk, she embarks on journeys few would know, seeing her kingdom from a perspective usually reserved for servants. You trudge softly beside her, aware of the strange thrill of moving unseen through streets and riverbanks, like a shadow with purpose. Mainstream fact: queens occasionally traveled in secret, often using river barges or concealed palanquins to inspect lands, meet loyal supporters, or observe ceremonies without attracting formal attention. Such journeys were risky, but they offered unique insight into regions far from the palace's rigid rules. Historians still argue whether these excursions were frequent or largely ceremonial stories embellished over time. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens used decoy caravans, sending multiple identical barges down the river to confuse spies and curious onlookers. You imagine a flotilla of silk-draped vessels, all looking the same, with only the queen's attendants knowing which contained the real monarch. It's the 15th century equivalent of sending 3 identical emails to keep hackers guessing. The river is smooth, reflecting lanterns and willow branches as it curves gently beneath arched bridges. You notice the quietude, broken only by soft splashes of oars and distant calls of waterfowl. The queen sits at the prow, her posture straight, eyes scanning banks lined with fishermen and farmers, absorbing life beyond stone walls. For a moment, you sense her delight. These glimpses of ordinary life, so different from palace routines, must feel like a breath of freedom. Meals during travel are simple yet deliberate. Steamed buns, lightly salted vegetables, and dried fruits are carefully wrapped, both practical and symbolic. You nibble alongside her, imagining the contrast between lavish palace banquets and these restrained, portable offerings. Some accounts suggest that queens even carried small pouches of herbs or talismans to ward off ill fortune during travel, blending superstition and pragmatism seamlessly. Historians still argue whether these excursions were primarily political, personal, or a mix of both. Some records hint at secret diplomacy, whispered instructions delivered to local officials, discreet surveys of lands, or the subtle reinforcement of loyalty among regional leaders. You picture the queen nodding discreetly, acknowledging a local elder while signaling a subtle approval that only her network would understand. Along the riverbanks, children pause their play to stare at the silent, veiled figure gliding by. Animals sense the difference too. Even ducks hesitate, as if recognizing that royalty has passed in quiet anonymity. The queen allows herself small pleasures, watching patterns in the ripples, noting birds' flight, hearing laughter that isn't polished for courtly ears. These moments are fleeting yet precious, and you lean back on your cushion, savoring the rare sense of unpredictability. At twilight, the barges return to the palace dock, and the queen disembarks as unobtrusively as she departed. You note how she shifts instantly from explorer back to monarch, posture and expression resuming the careful choreography required by inner court life. Her journey outside the walls is now a memory, tucked away like a hidden treasure, known only to her and perhaps a few trusted attendants. You realize that travel, even brief and discreet, allowed her a dual identity, The queen in command of a sprawling empire and the woman savoring fleeting glimpses of ordinary life? These secret journeys, like whispers on the water, remind you that even amid immense responsibility, small freedoms can ripple through time, leaving a legacy of quiet resilience and careful observation. Returning from the river, you find yourself led into the palace's quieter quarters, where the queen indulges in her love for art and craft. These rooms are lined with fine brushes, colored pigments, and delicate silk ready for embroidery. The soft rustle of silk under her fingers blends with the faint smell of ink and tea, creating an atmosphere that feels almost sacred. You notice that even in these private spaces, the subtle choreography of palace life continues. Attendants move silently, offering materials, adjusting cushions, but never breaking the spell of focus. Mainstream fact: Chinese queens often practice calligraphy, painting, and embroidery, not only as leisurely pursuits, but as demonstrations of education and refinement. Mastery of these arts could elevate their standing in court and even serve as diplomatic gifts. Historians still argue whether queens practice these skills primarily for self-expression or as political tools. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some embroidery included tiny, secret motifs, a hidden animal, or a miniature phrase stitched along a hem that only the queen knew existed. One empress is said to have embroidered a tiny cat chasing a mouse along the lining of her ceremonial robe, invisible unless inspected closely. You imagine her smirking quietly at the secret detail while officials fawn over the visible pattern, completely unaware of her private joke. The queen selects a silk panel and dips her brush into pigments ground from stones, plants, or insects. She paints landscapes with mountains curling like smoke, rivers glinting under a sun that exists only in ink. You notice the concentration in her eyes, the rhythm of her hand, and the deep satisfaction in creating something permanent, yet intimate. It's a contrast to the ephemeral power of gossip or political maneuvering. Here, her choices leave a visible trace, preserved for anyone astute enough to recognize it. Some queens were known for intricate fans where poetry and painting merged. You watch her trace brush over a tiny fan, crafting characters and illustrations that require hours of patience. The fan is more than decoration. It is portable artistry, a personal message, and sometimes a subtle declaration of taste or mood to those who see it. Historians still argue whether the poems written were widely circulated among trusted circles or remained strictly private. Attendants quietly refill ink, grind stones for pigments, and lay out additional silks. The queen moves with deliberate care, occasionally pausing to inhale the scent of dried flowers tucked into her brush pot. The ritual of creation is both meditative and precise, a blend of aesthetic pleasure and self-discipline. You feel the slow cadence, the gentle ASMR rhythm in every movement, the soft slide of brush across silk, the quiet scraping of pigments, the delicate touch of fabric against fingers. Quirky objects litter the work table. A tiny carved phoenix used as a paperweight, jade discs that double as brush rests, and minuscule pouches containing powdered gold. You wonder at the combination of practicality, symbolism, and whimsy that defines her creative space. Every detail serves a purpose, from inspiration to aesthetic delight. As the afternoon wanes, she pauses and leans back, eyes scanning the tiny creations. There's a serenity here that contrasts sharply with the precision and tension of the outer court. You realize that artistry, like ritual and study, is another form of agency. Quiet, controlled, yet deeply personal. The queen has mastered the art of influence, of diplomacy, and now she masters the art of herself, expressed through brush, ink, and silk. The last rays of sunlight catch a painted leaf, glinting like molten gold. You sense the passage of time, the slow, comforting rhythm of palace life continuing even in private spaces. And you, trailing quietly behind, absorb the quiet power of patience, creativity, and subtle expression, understanding that even small acts of artistry can leave enduring marks, invisible to most yet profoundly meaningful. As evening deepens, you follow her into a chamber lined with music instruments. Guqing, pipa, flutes, and small drums. The queen settles beside a guqin, its polished wood gleaming in the soft candlelight. Here, sound becomes a language as subtle as the gestures you've witnessed in corridors, as precise as embroidery, and as potent as whispered gossip. The palace is quiet, save for the faint rustle of silk and the gentle hum of anticipation in the air. Mainstream fact: music was central to Chinese court life. Queens were trained in instruments and vocal performance, both as markers of education and as tools to influence mood and ceremony. Music could signal approval, soften tension, or guide ritual, making it a subtle but powerful form of communication. Historians still argue whether queens use music primarily for personal solace, public influence, or both. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens reportedly used miniature bells attached to their sleeves or robes to create soft accompaniment during personal performances. Imagine a secret percussion track, woven into every gesture, a kind of palace lo-fi beat only she could conduct. You can almost hear the faint jingling as she lifts a finger to pluck a string, adding an accidental sparkle to the melody. You watch her fingers glide over the guqin strings, producing notes that ripple through the room like liquid silk. There is a meditation in each movement, a slow, deliberate cadence that mirrors the rhythm of palace life. Careful, observant, restrained. Attendants sit quietly, barely breathing, understanding that the sound is both entertainment and ritual, a reflection of status, refinement, and inner calm. Some performances included poetry recitation alongside music. The queen's voice is soft, almost indistinguishable from the guqin's tone, yet every word carries deliberate cadence and emotion. Lines describing mountains, rivers, or fleeting blossoms are more than art. They echo principles of harmony, subtle philosophy, and sometimes veiled commentary on court life. Historians still argue whether these recitations were primarily for personal reflection or designed to communicate messages to those attuned to nuance. You notice that even in these quiet moments, music and movement are coded. The tempo, emphasis, and even slight changes in phrasing convey approval or caution. Imagine a subtle smile as a beat is slightly prolonged, or a lowered head as a note fades. To outsiders, it might seem like mere artistry, but insiders understand it as deliberate communication. Quirky details abound. The queen keeps tiny stones inside her instrument case to alter resonance, or occasionally hums in a pitch that mimics the rhythm of palace bells. You lean in, caught in the hypnotic blend of sound and ritual, aware that every vibration has layers of meaning, both practical and poetic. Music here is diplomacy, meditation, and amusement rolled into one. By the time the final notes fade, the room is hushed, leaving only the echo of soft footsteps retreating along polished floors. You feel the lingering resonance, both in the air and in your own chest, a quiet pulse of influence and artistry. The queen rises, her fingers brushing the strings one last time, a delicate, intimate gesture that signals closure, mastery, and stillness. As you step back into the corridor, the palace seems to breathe more softly, as if the music has soaked into its walls. You realize that sound, like silk, gossip, or ritual, is a medium of control, expression, and calm, and that in every note played, the queen both commands and comforts, subtly shaping the rhythm of life around her. Night deepens, and you follow her into the palace's quietest chambers, the bedrooms and private alcoves where the day's grandeur finally gives way to rest. The air is thick, with warmth from heated floors and faint incense. Lanterns glow softly, casting elongated shadows that curl like gentle smoke along the walls. Here, beyond public ritual and private artistry, the queen engages in personal reflection, preparing herself for the next cycle of ceremonies, politics, and secret journeys. Mainstream fact: Chinese queens often had elaborate bedtime routines designed to maintain health, beauty, and mental clarity. Herbal baths, silk wrappings, and gentle massage were common practices. Rest was ritualized, not merely functional, because a queen's alertness and composure were essential to palace operations. Historians still argue whether these practices were primarily restorative, symbolic, or a combination of both. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens reportedly kept small talismans or charms beneath their pillows, tiny jade animals or silk pouches filled with fragrant herbs. These were meant to encourage pleasant dreams or protect against nightmares. You imagine them twinkling in the low candlelight, a private army of magical helpers working silently as she drifts towards sleep. You watch her remove elaborate robes and wrap herself in soft silk, the fabric whispering against skin, as her attendants quietly arrange cushions and blankets. A faint smile flits across her face, perhaps. She recalls a secret joke from the day, a hidden triumph, or a minor indulgence nobody else would ever know. The intimate freedom of these moments contrasts sharply with the carefully choreographed public persona. Her room is adorned with small reminders of personal history. A carved box from her hometown, a painting gifted by a sibling, a tiny porcelain bird that seems almost alive. You sense that objects, like rituals, serve as anchors, little pieces of memory that reinforce identity amid the constant demands of palace life. Historians still argue whether these items were deeply sentimental or primarily symbolic, but their quiet presence is undeniable. She performs her nightly rituals slowly, a small sip of chrysanthemum tea, gentle stretches to release tension, and soft massage of hands and feet. The sounds are minimal but hypnotic: the slide of silk, the faint clink of a teacup, the rustle of a perfumed handkerchief. These gestures are soothing, both physically and mentally, a bridge from duty to private peace. Quirky observations abound. One empress reportedly whispered short affirmations to a favorite jade figurine before sleep, while another rearranged a set of small stones, according to lunar phases. You imagine her speaking softly, the words floating in the candlelit room, comforting and steadying, a form of self-guidance centuries before modern mindfulness practices. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal routines had measurable effects on well-being or were primarily ceremonial. Either way, the deliberate slowness and attentiveness suggest that queens carved out their own rhythms, claiming private time in a world otherwise dictated by external demands. As she finally lies down, you notice the small details: a silk fan at the bedside, an embroidered pillow tucked beneath her head, and the faint scent of sandalwood drifting through the room. The palace outside may remain a web of intrigue and protocol, but within these walls, serenity rules. You exhale quietly, recognizing that even amidst power, beauty, and responsibility, the queen's private life retains the simple, universal pursuit of rest. The palace is nearly silent now, only the occasional rustle of silk or soft creak of a floorboard breaking the stillness. You settle beside her in the dim glow of a single lantern, absorbing the quiet majesty of these private chambers. Outside, the moon casts silver ribbons across stone courtyards, reflecting in pools and glinting off jade ornaments. Here, the world narrows to soft light, gentle sound, and the rhythm of a single, sovereign life moving toward rest. Mainstream fact: even the most powerful queens adhered to strict nightly schedules, including meditation, reflection, and preparation for the coming day. Sleep wasn't just restorative, it was part of a carefully curated daily ritual. Historians still argue whether the intricacies of these routines were universal among dynasties or varied dramatically depending on individual preference and court culture. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some queens reportedly kept small scrolls of humorous poetry under their pillows to lighten the mind before sleep. One empress wrote lines about clumsy officials and absurd ceremonies, reading them quietly with a soft chuckle. You picture her lying on silk sheets, hiding a smile in the shadowed corners of the room, a secret amusement that even attendants couldn't perceive. The queen performs gentle stretching, rolling her shoulders, flexing fingers, and massaging palms in slow, deliberate motions. These small rituals are both restorative and symbolic, allowing the body and mind to release the accumulated tensions of court life. You notice how attentive she is to each movement, how every gesture is an exercise in care, an assertion of self even amid obligations. She sips warm chrysanthemum tea from a delicate cup, inhaling the floral scent with eyes closed. The heat seeps into her chest, softening the spine, quieting the mind. You feel the room slowing, your own heartbeat aligning with the quiet, ritualized tempo. Even the attendants seem to fade into shadow, leaving only the intimate bubble of calm surrounding the queen. Some nights involve whispered reflection, jotting small notes or folding tiny charms into silk pouches. You imagine her thoughts drifting between ambition, strategy, memories of childhood, and fleeting pleasures like stolen fruit, a shared joke, or the fleeting call of a distant bird. Historians still argue whether such nightly rituals were therapeutic, spiritual, or performative, but they clearly offer a window into her private world. The room is suffused with soft candlelight, shadows dancing like delicate ink strokes along the walls. The queen adjusts her pillow, smooths her sheets, and finally lies back, closing her eyes with a quiet sigh. You notice the subtle tension in her posture relaxing, shoulders descending, fingers resting softly atop one another. It is a moment of release, both physical and symbolic. The queen, sovereign of court and country, permits herself a fragile human pause. You feel the pulse of the palace slowing alongside her, the weight of centuries pressing lightly, yet gently, into this moment. Even amid power, intrigue, and ritual, there remains a private sanctuary, a time to breathe, to rest, to let the world continue without constant observation. The soft rhythm of her breathing, the faint scent of tea and silk, and the gentle flicker of candlelight envelop you in serenity. As you lie quietly, eyes half closed, the palace feels suspended, a world where time moves gently, where influence is both immense and invisible, and where small, personal rituals preserve humanity amid grandeur. You sense that every brushstroke, every note, every whispered secret contributes to the tapestry of her life, a life both public and hidden, remarkable in its delicate, enduring complexity. And now, as the lanterns dim and the soft hum of the palace lulls you towards sleep, you exhale alongside her, feeling the gentle closure of another day in the hidden, intricate world of mysterious Chinese queens. The night stretches endlessly, yet softly, like a silk ribbon uncoiling across moonlit courtyards. The palace walls, once imposing and commanding, now feel protective, enclosing you in a calm hush. Every detail you've observed, the carefully arranged scrolls, the secret paths through gardens, the subtle gestures of power, the hidden laughter, and delicate rituals, seems to fold gently into the evening, creating a tapestry of quiet contemplation. You imagine the gentle flow of time here, the way lantern light flickers across jade ornaments, how shadows play softly over painted screens, how the faint scent of tea or sandalwood drifts through chambers. It is a world that demands patience, mindfulness, and attentiveness, and yet it offers immense comfort, a slow rhythm that soothes even the most restless mind. The queens, despite their immense responsibility, found small sanctuaries of peace, moments where influence gave way to reflection and ritual became meditation. As you settle deeper into this imagined palace, your thoughts soften. The busy intrigue of the day, the flurry of gossip, the clatter of courtiers all fade into a background hum, a gentle echo of human ingenuity and quiet persistence. You notice the subtle pulse of life in every gesture, the beauty in restraint, the calm in repetition, and the pleasure of observing someone navigating power with grace and subtlety. Let your breath mirror the palace rhythm, slow, measured, and steady. Picture soft silk brushing floors, the faint gurgle of koi ponds, candlelight dancing on walls, and inked scrolls waiting patiently to tell their stories. You are here, fully present, cradled by the gentle cadence of centuries past, carried into quiet reflection. Now, dim your own lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and feel the tranquility seep into your thoughts. Let your imagination drift beside these queens, tracing their careful steps, their hidden joys, their subtle strategies. Allow the serenity of their hidden lives to fold into your mind, easing each thought, slowing every heartbeat. and inviting the deepest kind of rest,